For many years, fans have wondered about Booth's real story between two of country music's biggest stars. George Strait and Alan Jackson. Were they close friends, quiet enemies, or something way more complicated? At 73 years old, Strait eyes teeth holding back anymore. And what he just said is making everyone in the country music world talk. Way before the cowboy hat came like a crown, before the hit records, packed stadiums, and the title king of country, George Harvey Strait was just a quiet Texas boy with a heart full of music and a story no one expected. Born on May 18, 1952, in Petite, Texas, a town so small it barely shows up on maps. George grew up far from the bright lights of Nashville or the celebrity buzz of Los Angeles. He was raised in nearby Pearsall on a 2,000-acre cattle ranch that his father owned. Life was simple, hard, and honest. His father, John Strait, was a middle school math teacher and drencher, a man who believed in work, respect, and keeping your head down. And maybe that's where George learned his life's long way of thinking. Say little, sing loud, and let the music do the talking. But here's something most fans don't. Now, George didn't start off chasing country music. In high school, he played in a garage rock band. It wasn't until he joined the U.S. Army and went to Hawaii that something clicked. That's where he first started singing country music with a band called Ramblin' Country. And that far from home, surrounded by military life, is where a cowboy was born. Still, his early journey back home wasn't easy. After leaving the Army in the mid-1970s, George came back to Texas with a dream, a guitar, and very few connections. He went to Southwest Texas State University, now called Texas State University, and studied farming. But music kept calling. He started playing with Asmel local band, Stony Ridge, which Helator renamed the Ace in the Hole Band. Week after week, he played tiny honky-tonks and dusty bars across South Texas. The places were small, the crowds were smaller. But George had a voice that didn't need a spotlight. It demanded one. Even so, Nashville wasn't interested. T sent demo after demo toured labels only to get rejected over and over. He was told his sound was too old-fashioned, too out-of-date, and wouldn't sell. In a time when pop country was getting popular, George's rock style didn't fit what they wanted. But came the surprise no one expected. In 1981, thanks to a bit of luck and a low taff trying, MCA Records gave him a chance. Just one single, a test thought song, Unwound. It wasn't just a hit, it was like a cannon shot. Unwound tore through radio and straight into the top 10. Suddenly, a man with a shy, smiling classic voice had something Nashville couldn't ignore. Momentum, and with it, he started an amazing career of over 60 number-one singles, dozens of albums, and an unshakable grip, the music style he loved. But despite the fame, George never changed. He kept his private life out of the spotlight. He rarely gave interviews, and unlike many of his peers, he stayed away from fights and gossip completely. That silence, though, would eventually make people ask questions, especially about his friendships in the industry. Talking about his friendships, one name kept coming up: Alan Jackson. Two huge figures in same music style. Two men with similar values, musical tastes, and old-school styles. But while fans loved their duets and shared stage moments, others felt distance. Why didn't they tour together more often? Why so few joint interviews? Was there quiet respect or quiet rivalry? The answers didn't come quickly. Because true to form, George Strait stayed silent until now. At 73, George has finally decided to open up. Not with drama or show, but with calm, down-to-earth honesty that has defined his entire life. What he has said about his long, complicated connect with Alan Jackson is bath-touching and surprising. But to understand the full weight of it, Let's go back again to the early 90s when their paths first truly crossed in Thepi Blick Eye. Both men had come out as defenders of real country music during a time when the style was changing. While their artists were mixing rock and pepinto their sound, George and Alan held firm. They valued steel guitars over keyboards, story-driven lyrics over catchy hooks that made them outsiders and Andalis. But with similar audiences and a changing industry, even quiet friendships feel like competition. Yet through it all, there was a mutual respect that never wavered. George once said privately to a close friend, as told in a 2018 radio interview, "Alan is thickened of guy I would tip my hat to, even when no one is watching." That quote would later take on more meaning than fans realized, especially when you consider what happened behind the scenes. Like the time George reported listed, aside from a major award nomination to make room for Alan or Ho, both men worked privately for their turn of traditional sounds to the country music association's yearly awards when the style became more and more pop-dominated. They were fighting the same fight, just not always side by side. It's those hidden moments seen by cameras, unknown to fans, that show the truth of their relationship. And the truth is, George Strait didn't just respect Alan Jackson. He quietly looked up to him, because the next part of George's journey, how he got through personal tragedy, how he stayed loyal to his roots, and how he kept his crown without ever chasing it, is what truly defines the man behind the music. And it's in this part of his story that the full weight of his words about Alan Jackson will finally make sense. While George Strait's career was climbing quickly through the 80s and 90s, few realized the quiet pain he was carrying behind the scenes. For all his public poise and country charm, George was no stranger to heartbreak. In 1986, tragedy struck when his 13-year-old daughter, Jenner Strait, was killed in a car accident in San Marcos, Texas. It was a devastating loss, one that George spoke of publicly. He chose a lens over show, pulling back further from media appearances and interviews. While the country music world rallied around him, George dealt with his grief privately through music and family. The emotional impact of that loss became a defining moment in his life. Instead of falling apart or stepping back, he pressed forward with more conviction, grounded not in fame, but in faith and the memory of his daughter. He quietly started the Jennifer Strait Memorial Foundation, which supports children's charities in Texas, but headed so without talking about it widely. That in many ways was the essence of George Strait, doing the right thing without needing applause for it. This deep personal loss changed how he viewed the industry, his fans, and his fellow artists. While others were chasing headlines, George focused on what really mattered. He avoided scandals, feuds, and the attention-grabbing machinery that so often surrounds country supers. That approach set him apart, quietly built the foundation for one of the most respected reputations in modern music. As his career grew in teeth to thousands, George didn't chase trends. He didn't change his image to appeal to younger audiences or move toward crossover sounds. Instead, he doubled down on traditional country music. When mine executives told him to modernize, he politely said, no, he wasn't here to follow waves. He was the answer. This quiet leadership earned him respect from the next generation of artists, and one of the most vocal among them was Alan Jackson. Alan had always said George Strait was one of his biggest influences. In multiple interviews over the years, he called George a true north for country music, a symbol of honesty and authenticity. And while the two men rarely toured or worked together in depth, their careers ran on almost parallel tracks, both Southern men with humble upbringings, both traditionalists in a style that was constantly changing and both fiercely loyal to country's roots. Their bond, though largely understated, became more visible in the late 2000s. At awards shows, fans started noticing moments of unspoken respect, a nodding from the crowd as Georgia performed, George tipping his hat as Alan accepted an award. They weren't showy gestures, but to fans of real country, they meant everything. The mutual respect was further confirmed during George Strait's farewell tour in McT 2014, called The Cowboy Rides Away, at his final concert in Arlington, Texas. Alan Jackson performed alongside George in front of over 100,000 fans, the largest ticketed indoor concert in U.S. history, when the two shared the stage for Amarillo by Morning. It wasn't just a duet, it was a passing of the torch attribute, a silent nod to decades of shared purpose. But even then, Georgie remained publicly quiet about the nature of their relationship. So when Heavenly spoke years later, people listened. In a recent interview on a Texas-based country radio station in nearly 2025, George Strait, now 73, was asked about the state of country music and the artists he felt represented it best. He paused. Then in classic Georgia fashion, he delivered a simple, heartfelt response. "You know, I've always had a lot of respect for Alan. He stood tall when the industry wanted us to bend. We didn't talk a lot, but we understood each other. That kind of loyalty, that's rare." The host, clearly caught off guard, asked more, wanting to know if the two had ever had tension. George smiled, then added, "No tension. Just two guys doing the same thing from different lanes. I always appreciated that he never compromised. That meant more to me than anything we could have said." That short statement sent fans into a frenzy. For years, theories swirled around the silence between them. It all made sense. It wasn't rivalry. It was reverence. Strait's quiet admiration for Alan Jackson mirrored the very values he upheld throughout his career. Humility, consistency, and purpose without pretense. It wasn't about flashy collaborations or publicity stunts. It was about authenticity. Meanwhile, Alan Jackson was faced recent health challenges due to a degenerative nerve condition called Charcot-Marie tooth disease, was reportedly moved by George's comments. According to close friends, Alan called George after the interview aired. It was the first time in years two had spoken at length. That conversation remains private, but what's come out since is a visible closeness. One that fans hadn't seen before. George, who rarely posts on social media, shared a simple image a few weeks later. Two cowboy hats resting on a studio mic stand, no caption, just mutual understanding. As both men enter the twilight of their careers, their story, once shaped by mystery, is now defined by mutual respect. And for fans, that truth matters more than anything made up ever could. The king of country and the tall, quiet outlaw didn't need to be loud about their bond. They just had to live it. And now that the truth is out, fans finally understand what Moni had always hoped was true. George Strait and Alan Jackson weren't distant stars. They were pillars holding up the house of country music from opposite ends, both refusing to let it fall, with a combined total of over 150 million albums sold and more than 100 #1 hits between them. George Strait and Alan Jackson didn't just dominate country music. They defined its boundaries. They created the framework for what country could be when held tight to its roots. Even as the industry around them shifted toward commercialism and crossover success. And today, their influence runs deeper than charts or awards. It's in the DNA of modern country music. As younger artists rise, many of them, whether traditionalists or style blenders, still measure themselves against the quiet standards set by Strait and Jackson. Their work ethic, clean reputations, and refusal to be swayed by industry trends have becometh gold standard. For many aspiring country artists, being successful no longer just means landing a hit. It means being respected like George. It means standing firm like Alan. This impact is seen most clearly in the world of today's stars. Luke Combs, who often performs covers of both artists in his live shows, has publicly said, "You can't call yourself country if you don't acknowledge what George and Alan built." They made it okay to be proud of your ascent, your roots, your story. Combs, often praised for his own neo-traditional style, considers them his blueprint. Similarly, John Purdie, another strong defender of traditional country, credits his sound to the foundation they built. They didn't yell about what they stood for. T showed up year after year and reminded us where we came from. Even artists have taken the style in new directions, like Chris Stapleton or Cody Johnson cite them as formative influences. For them, the question isn't whether George Strait or Alan Jackson was popular, but whether they were true. And in a time when authenticity is currency, Strait and Jackson's legacies have never been more relevant. Their influence even extends beyond music. In an industry often fueled by image and scandal, both men maintained quiet, private lives. George Strait has been married to his high school sweetheart, Norma, since 1971. Alan Jackson married Denise Jackson in 1979, and despite publicized marriage, they have remained together, where personal branding often overshadows artistry. These long-lasting relationships offered something seriously rare: stability and discretion. What also sets them apart is their restraint. They never claimed to be perfect or outspoken heroes of the style. They didn't criticize the evolution of country music with bitterness. Instead, they simply held their ground and let time vindicate their style, and time did. As the 2010s saw country music become more influenced by pop and hip-hop, many long-time listeners became disillusioned. They missed the fiddle, the steel guitar, the storytelling. And suddenly, the music of George Strait and Alan Jackson felt more essential than ever. Country radio might have changed, but the fans had not. This nostalgia-driven resurgence led to a deeper appreciation for their discographies. George Strait's Troubadour became an anthem for aging gracefully in the spotlight, while Alan Jackson's Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning was revisited as one of the most honest, unfiltered musical responses to national tragedy. In 2022, when Alan reviled his battle with Charcot-Marie tooth disease, the country communitorily behind him. Tributes poured in, not just from peers, but from new artists who grew up listening to him and modeled their careers after his. Georgia Strait, characteristically private, released a short statement offering support. "Alan has always walked with grace on and off stage, and I know he'll continue to do so. This kind of quiet brotherhood, unspoken for decades, was finally on full display." Meanwhile, George Strait's semi-retired status online enhanced his legend, though. He stopped touring regularly after 2014. He continued to perform selective shows, often to sold-out stadiums, and in doing so, he preserved a rare kind of mystique. When George plays now, it feels less like a concert and more like a national holiday for country fans. Their legacy has also been institutionalized. George Strait was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2006. Alan Jackson followed in 2017. Both have a stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Both have received the CMA's prestigious Willie Nelson Lifetime Achievement Award, and both have been honored by fellow musicians in tribute performance succeed major country events. But awards can't fully capture what they built. Their true legacy lies in the shift they created, a pivot toward authenticity in an age of performance. They taught an entire generation that it was okay to speak softly and sing truthfully. That too didn't need gimmicks or headlines to make an impact. That the weight of your words mattered more than the number of your streams. And perhaps, most importantly, they reminded the world that country music at its core is about real lives: loss, love, hope, struggle, and pride. The cowboy hats weren't props. The stories weren't made up. They were reflections of the lives their audiences were living. Now, As George Strait enters his mid-70s and Alan Jackson continues to face the realities of a progressive illness. The two men stand as monuments, not just to country music, but to a way of being in the public eye, honest, modest, resilient. In a 2024 interview, Lainey Wilson said it best. They made space for people like him, and they never once asked for credit. And that's the ultimate irony. The two men who never demanded attention become the standard by which everyone else is measured. Their bond, long misunderstood, finally clarified, only deepens that impact. What began as two parallel careers has, in hindsight, become a shared chapter in country music history. One written not with loud declarations, but with quiet dignity.